let Putin succeed there, the deterrent effect on NATO's new plans would be fatally compromised. So I told President Zelensky at Downing Street on Monday that we will harden our resolve. We struck an agreement together to share battlefield technology, accelerating our support for Ukraine's defence, while boosting British security and British jobs. We committed to providing hundreds more air defence missiles, paid for not by the British taxpayer, but with money from Russia's frozen assets. And together with Europe, Canada and our Indo-Pacific partners, we announced that we will deliver €40 billion of military aid to Ukraine this year, matching last year's pledge in full. There is a path to a just and lasting peace, but it will only come through flipping the pressure onto Putin. His position is weaker than he claims. So I urged all our partners, including the US, to step up the pressure now with more sanctions and more military support to bring Russia to the table to agree an unconditional ceasefire leading to serious negotiations. Let me turn to the G7 summit, where again my priority was to deliver in the national interest. And again I can report some significant progress. Leaders agreed to take decisive action on illegal migration, following the UK's lead in using hard-headed measures like sanctions. We marked an export contract with Canada worth over £500 million, creating jobs here at home. We secured Canada's agreement to ratify Britain's entry to the CPTPP, a trading bloc worth $12 trillion. And we secured President Trump's signature to fully implement our trade deal, which will slash tariffs on British goods. His executive order, Mr. Speaker, will remove aerospace tariffs completely, cut tariffs on cars from 27.5% that British car makers face now to 10% in a matter of days, saving thousands of jobs in the West Midlands and around the country. Mr. Speaker, I've been to Jaguar Land Rover many times now. I've looked those workers in the eye, and I know what this means to them, to their families, and to their whole communities. And that is who I'm representing at summits like this, the working people of Britain. Mr. Speaker, navigating this world requires cool heads. It defies simplistic answers and knee-jerk judgments. We don't pretend we can fix every global problem, but we can carve a unique path through these dangerous times to secure and renew Britain in an era of global instability. That's what our plan for change is all about, putting Britain's national interest first. After years of economic chaos, we've delivered economic stability for the British people. After years of our armed forces being hollowed out, we're building up our military, firing up our industries, leading in NATO, supporting Ukraine, keeping Britain safe. After years of fraying alliances, we're rebuilding them and shaping them to serve the British people, focused every ounce of our global influence to deliver for working people, to deliver it in the national interest. And I commend this statement to the House.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. He has evaded Prime Minister's questions for 2 weeks, only to come back here to tell us what we already heard on the news. This is a weak statement from a weak Prime Minister, which can be characterised in 2 words: noises off. In his statement, the Prime Minister said, "We urge Iran and Israel to honour the ceasefire." He said, "We are using every diplomatic lever to support this effort." What diplomatic levers? Are they the same levers he's using with his backbench rebels? Is he just asking them to please play nice? Let's be honest, Mr. Speaker. Nobody cares what this Prime Minister thinks, and why should they, when he doesn't even know what he thinks, and clearly no one cares what he thinks because he was not involved. We used to be a strategic player on the global stage, Mr. Speaker, advancing Britain's interests with confidence.
Order, order. You may not wish to hear the Leader of the Opposition. I do. Can I just say it doesn't do anybody good in this chamber to try and shout somebody down who's speaking. Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. They can shout as much as they like, but we all know the truth. We used to be a strategic player on the global stage, advancing Britain's interests with confidence, and now we are on the sidelines. Over the last few weeks, historic events unfolded in the Middle East, and at every stage, Britain has been out of step with the US and out of the loop with Israel. Last week, the Prime Minister came back from the G7, insisting that there was nothing that President Trump said that would indicate he was about to get involved in this conflict. Days later, the US launched its attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. He had no idea what was going on. The week before, Israel launched an attack on Iran, and it became apparent that the UK was not even informed about the attack in advance, despite us having been involved in previous preventative action. How is this standing up on the world stage? On Tuesday, the Foreign Secretary, a lawyer, repeatedly could not say whether the US strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities were legal. This is a government that doesn't know what it's doing. Let me make the Conservative position clear, Mr. Speaker. Iran has been a direct threat to the UK for years, plotting terrorism on British soil. It must not get nuclear weapons. And this is a time for Europe to step up, and the UK should be leading. Instead, we have an Attorney General using international law to constrain and restrict the UK while the Prime Minister hovers indecisively on the sidelines. What we need is a leader. Instead, we have 3 lawyers. Last week, I wrote to the Prime Minister about how this conflict has underscored the folly of the government's £30 billion Chagos surrender deal. The Diego Garcia base is of obvious strategic importance for conflicts in the Middle East. They're shaking their heads. They don't understand. It is obvious. It was used extensively. Diego Garcia was used extensively during the war in Afghanistan, including by the United States. And at Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister said that this Chagos surrender had been opposed by our adversaries, Russia, China and Iran. Since then, it has been widely reported that China have offered massive congratulations on the deal and conveyed that it fully supports Mauritius. So can the Prime Minister now admit that he was incorrect to state on the floor of this House that China opposes the Chagos deal? And can he confirm if he still views China as an adversary? Under the terms of his deal, if the US were to launch an attack from the military base on Diego Garcia, we would have to inform the Chinese allied Mauritius government. Will he abandon the deeply flawed surrender deal? Because if not, when will he introduce the legislation setting out the details of the Chagos surrender so Parliament can consider and debate it? We welcome the announcement that the UK will be buying F-35A fighter jets, and I'm pleased that the Labour Party has now moved on from its previous position where it did not support NATO and advocated against the nuclear deterrent. They pretend that it never happened. We have the receipts. Conservatives are proud of exceeding the NATO baseline of 2% of GDP on defence, and we led NATO in getting there. But the government's aspiration to get spending on national security to 5% is just hope. The reality is Labour does not have a plan to get to 3%. It is all smoke and mirrors. And we do not know what the government will spend this extra 1.5% component on. So can the Prime Minister confirm whether this is money that we are already spending or whether there will be any new money? Because so long as this plan remains unfunded, these are just words. Instead of using smoke and mirrors to inflate defence spending, Labour should heed our call to hit 3% by the end of this Parliament with a fully funded plan to get there. You look at the money they claim they're going to save with their welfare bill. $5 billion is nowhere near the tens, if not hundreds of billions that we're going to need to find to meet this defence spending target. And this is the problem, Mr. Speaker. It is one thing to talk about spending money on planes and infrastructure, making announcements about reviews, but it is another to be clear where the money comes from and how it will be spent efficiently to secure the defence of our nation. They can mutter all they like. We all know that they are terrified of doing anything that is even remotely difficult. Mr. Speaker, it is crucial that there is a clear, united front in full support of Ukraine which secures peace on their terms. The stakes could not be higher. We need the government to be leveraging British influence in every way it can for Ukraine. So can he tell us whether he pushed for clearer language in the NATO communique about Russia being the aggressor in this conflict? And can he update us on the UK's current position on Ukraine's accession to NATO, given the absence of detail in this year's communique? We must ensure our leading role continues, but this requires strong leadership and an ability to influence. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the Prime Minister may have finally returned to this House after a fortnight away, but in truth, he is all at sea. irrelevant on the world stage, impotent in the face of rising illegal immigration, and now with 126 of his own MPs all openly undermining his authority, his government is incapable of making even the smallest changes to bring down the cost of our ever-expanding welfare bill. There is no way they're going to be able to pay for our defence. This is a government that is paralysed by its own legal advice, paralysed by its rebellious backbenchers, and paralysed by the fear of being found out for having no real vision for this country.
Prime Minister. Can I say to those who will let in, please don't stand. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we live in more volatile times than many of us can remember, with conflicts in many parts of the world that are evolving in a very fast and dangerous way. There's never been a more important time to work with our allies and to be absolutely serious in our response. That response was unserious. Unserious. To suggest at a time like this that the Prime Minister attending the G7 Summit and the NATO Summit is avoiding PMQs is unserious. What happened at NATO yesterday was historic. It was very important at a time like this that NATO showed unity and strength with a commitment to the future, not just to the past. That took a huge amount of work with our allies over the last few days and weeks. We have been centrally involved in that, crafting the final outcome, and we were recognised as having done so. I'm proud that we helped put that summit into the right place yesterday, and the world emerged safer as a result. And that was the unanimous view of 32 allies leaving NATO yesterday. For the leader of the opposition to belittle it just shows how irrelevant she and the party opposite are becoming. They used to once be serious about these issues. They used to be capable of cross-party consensus. And all of that is slipping away. We've led on Ukraine, 3 trade deals, and she talks about the prospect of US attack. She must have overlooked the fact that on Tuesday, when I returned from the G7, the first thing I did was go straight into a COBRA meeting to plan for all contingencies, including a possible US attack on Iran. And I'll tell her why I did that, although we did offer a Privy Council briefing, so she knows this. We have military personnel co-located in nearly all the bases across the Middle East, and therefore I was extremely concerned to ensure that immediately on my return, I took every step to ensure I had the highest levels of assuredness that we had the preparations in place to keep our people and our assets safe, should the need arise. So far from being blindsided, we were planning through last week, we were talking to the Americans, we were put on notice about everything that they did. She simply doesn't understand the nature of the relationship at that level. In relation to Diego Garcia, let me disabuse her. We do not have to give Mauritius advance notice under the treaty. That is absolutely clear. And she talks about defence spend. We are the party that has increased defence spend to the highest level since the Cold War, 2.5%. They talked about it. We did it. Mr. Speaker, she says we don't know where the money is coming from. She was pressed on this in an interview not so long ago, and this was her quote. She said this, Mr. Speaker, we talked about getting to 3% by 2030, and we couldn't make the numbers work, she said. And then she goes on, we need to find a way to make the numbers work. I was intrigued by this interview. I thought she was about to lay it out. Then she goes, quote, this sort of thing requires real thinking. And then she said, let's start looking at what we can do. It's about setting up task forces. Mr. Speaker, that's how unserious they are. She asked about the Ukraine communique. As she will know if she'd actually studied this, the way that NATO works is an iterative process. and therefore the position on Ukraine has not changed for NATO, and it's not changed under this government. On the contrary, we're recognised as leading on Ukraine, the closest ally of Ukraine, working with them the whole time. That is something I'm proud of. I think it's something the House is proud of, because we have been doing this on a cross-party basis across the House, and the sooner we get back to that, rather than the unserious response of the Leader of the Opposition, the better.
Chair of the First Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. In the year since the election of this Labour government, Britain is back as a force for good on the world stage. Yeah. Following the outbreak in the Middle East of conflict in the Middle East last week, I was proud to see the Prime Minister lead calls for calm, cool heads and de-escalation. Yeah. And in its aftermath, we must take seriously the renewed defence commitments that the Prime Minister has made at NATO. But we must also proudly wield the soft convening and convincing power that the UK has in spades. And that is soft power, which has historically been the key to successful diplomatic efforts in Iran, securing the JCPOA, and in the wider Middle East and around the world. Could the Prime Minister confirm what the Foreign Affairs Select Committee has learnt from our conversations with our European allies? It is quite clear that Britain is also quietly and effectively stepping up to lead the fight against Russian disinformation and cyber warfare, and the investment that we will be putting in it will be well spent.
Well, I thank her for her question. She's absolutely right. The need to de-escalate was the central focus into the weekend and out of the weekend, and I'm very pleased that we've reached a ceasefire in relation to the conflict in Iran, and we absolutely need that to hold. She's absolutely right about soft convening power of the United Kingdom. It is an incredible asset that we have, and yes, we are, and I can confirm for her, working with others in relation to Russian disinformation and cyber attacks, which, as the House knows, are a regular occurrence.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for early sight of his statement. Can I say that Liberal Democrats agree that it would have been wrong to leave an empty chair in front of the Union Jack at the table for the G7 and NATO, and that it's astonishing, and I share his surprise, that it's now Conservative policy not to attend the G7 and NATO. Mr Speaker, I'm glad the Prime Minister signalled retreat on his welfare plans and hope that he will now listen to everyone and not just his backbenchers. On the G7, despite the progress that he outlined, it remains extremely damaging to the world economy that the United States and Donald Trump continues their policy of protectionism. And I wondered if he could update the House, if he had discussions with other G7, indeed NATO colleagues, about how we could persuade President Trump to resign from protectionism. On NATO, the Prime Minister is right that Putin's imperial ambitions present a once-in-a-generation threat to our security. Last week, I travelled to Estonia to meet British troops and Estonian leaders, including Prime Minister Mikhail. Estonians have not forgotten the repression enforced by Russian tanks, nor the murder of 4 former Prime Ministers at the hands of the Kremlin. They are under no illusions about the threat posed by Putin, and we must not be either. Yeah. So I welcome his commitment to NATO's new spending target. In the face of Russia's war machine, the British Army remains an essential guarantor of our country's security and that of our allies. And meeting with our incredible troops stationed in Estonia, I was inspired by their skill and professionalism. We need to get more brilliant people like them into the military. So will the Prime Minister consider Liberal Democrat proposals to move more quickly to reverse the Conservatives' cuts to the Army and back our new £10,000 bonus for recruits? It's vital we take such measures as Putin continues his barbarism in Ukraine. Mr Speaker, our commitment to Ukraine's defence must be increased, not reduced. So in addition to the actions he outlined, can the Prime Minister confirm whether he has held more discussions with partners on not just using the interest from the Russian assets, but seizing the frozen Russian assets, so we can bolster our support for Ukraine and pay for a faster increase in defence spending? The Estonians believe they have a plan to deal with all the complications he mentions when I ask him questions about this. So is he prepared to meet me to discuss Estonian ideas to break the backlog so he can seize these assets? The Prime Minister also spoke about the conflicts and crises in the Middle East. He is right to push even harder for a ceasefire in Gaza. People around the world question whether military action rather than diplomacy will actually make us safer in the future. So we must redouble our efforts for a just peace in the region, and that must include self-determination for the Palestinian people. Yeah. Will the government finally commit to recognising a state for the Palestinians?
Yeah. Can I thank him for his question? He started by asking whether I'd discussed with other G7 partners the question of the tariffs from the US. Yes, we did. We do frequently discuss trade and the economy and the challenges, frankly, that those tariffs put in place for all economies. And that is the sort of coordination and discussion that goes on all of the time and will continue to do so. On the troops in Estonia, I've visited those troops a number of times myself. They are incredibly brave. They have a real sense of purpose. And I can tell him that at NATO, it was the front-line states on the border with Russia that were leading the charge in relation to the work that we had to do yesterday to renew and take forward the pledges that we make. He asked about reversing the cuts to the army. We will begin the work reversing those cuts. When the party opposite came into government, there were 100,000 in our army. When they left, there were 70,000. I think that's what Ben Wallace meant when he said they'd hollowed out our armed forces. Yep. On the question of the assets, and whether they themselves can be seized rather than just using the interest. I have been discussing that with colleagues, as he would expect. It is complicated, as he knows, and there isn't one view, frankly, on this issue amongst colleagues and allies. I'm very happy to see the proposals that he's received from Estonia, I believe, or any others, but it remains complicated. And I have to say, allies are in different places on this, but we will continue to discuss it. On a ceasefire in Gaza and recognition, I think it's very important, we have been pressing the case, particularly in recent days quite urgently and in close collaboration with our colleagues, the E3, Germany, France and the UK, working very closely together at the moment to say this is the moment to press on from Iran to a ceasefire in Gaza. And I mean that that should happen in days. Not weeks or months. I do think there's a window of opportunity here. I hope that it happens. I can't predict that it will. But I do think that all of us should do all we can to ensure that, along with the ceasefire in Iran, we push to that ceasefire in Gaza. And on the question of recognition, it's long been our party's policy, this government's policy, to recognise Palestine at the right time in the process to bring about the peace. Because I think without a two-state solution, there is little prospect of lasting peace in the region. That remains our policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, as part of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, I visited NATO's headquarters in the UK, where I met fantastic young men and women learning great skills as they prepare to defend Britain abroad. But for my constituents in Newcastle Central and West, they may well ask why, when we see cuts, for example, as proposed in the welfare bill, of such great amount, why defence spending is rising. For the benefit of my constituents, could he simply and briefly set that out?
Firstly, can I congratulate her on her elevation? I haven't seen her personally since then. Very well deserved. But she raised a really important point. It is right that we recognise that the first duty of the Prime Minister is to keep the country safe and secure in a volatile world. And that is a duty that I take extremely seriously. We do live in a volatile world. And it's not just something which happens overseas and has no impact on us, because what has happened in the Ukraine conflict has already had an impact on her constituents in relation to their energy bills, in relation to the cost of living and so much else. And we can see from the last week or two the impact that the conflict in Iran was having on oil prices again, which have a direct impact on her constituents. So it is absolutely right and in our own interests that we take the necessary measures in relation to defence spend. I should also say that we're determined to ensure that as we spend more on defence, that is reflected in good, well-paid jobs in the United Kingdom, including in her constituency, on all three fronts. That is the answer I give to her constituents.
Rishi Sunak.
See, the Iranian regime has long presented a threat to the United Kingdom. As the Prime Minister and I have both experienced, our security services have foiled almost 20 Iranian-backed plots here at home. The prospect of a regime like this having nuclear weapons is unacceptable, and so I welcome the US and Israeli action. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we and our European allies should now trigger snapback sanctions unless Tehran admits the IAEA and allows them to fully verify that all efforts to enrich enhanced uranium have ceased?
Well, I thank him for his question and endorse what he says about our security services, which, as he knows very, very well, do an incredible job in the most difficult of circumstances at great speed and have foiled a number of plots which would have caused widespread panic, violence and destruction. On snapback, thank him for raising this. That is a consideration that we are discussing with our allies. I do think that it has to be part of the pressure that we apply. Exactly when and how snapback is applied will obviously be a question of discussion, but he's absolutely right to say that is the very discussion we should be having at the moment. I thank him.
Clive.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome my honourable friend's statement and his commitment to increase defence expenditure, but given that we are looking to improve public services, health service, social care, education, police, is it realistic to do that within the current tax envelope? And hasn't the time come for us to review how we tax wealth as opposed to work, and to make sure that those people who can bear the heaviest load?
Well, I thank him for his question. On the question of defence spend, when we set out the commitment to 2.5 by 2027-28, I set out at the same time how we would fund it, and we will continue to take the approach to any spending commitment that we make. He will know that we made a commitment in our manifesto in relation to not raising taxes on working people, and we will keep to that commitment.
James Clever.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the element of the Prime Minister's statement where he explicitly links defence, diplomacy and domestic security, and he is absolutely right to highlight that interconnection. Therefore, will he revisit the spending review which sees 4.5% and 5% real terms reductions in Home Office and FCDO budgets to make sure they can actually do their jobs within that interconnected system? And in order to pay for that, will he ensure his Chancellor removes the job-destroying taxes on employment, reduces the tax burden which is seeing entrepreneurs and wealth creators leave the country in their droves? And will he show real leadership and ensure his backbenchers do not prevent his front bench from reducing the cost of our welfare bill so we can pay for these incredibly important governmental functions?
Well, I thank him on the question of the Home Office responsibility in relation to domestic security. He's absolutely right, and that's why it's important under the new definition of NATO that resilience at home is now included, because cyber attacks are commonplace. Attacks on energy has been weaponised, and there are many counter-terrorism operations that have to be carried out in relation to state threats. We were very careful in the spending review to make sure there was adequate money on all of those threats, and I went through that myself, so I can give him that assurance. In relation to the money coming in and out of the country, he'll no doubt want to celebrate. We've had record investment under this Labour government in the last 12 months, £120 billion, including the single biggest, which was £40 billion 2 days ago from Amazon, the single biggest investment, a sign of confidence in this government, being measured in many jobs across the country.
Well,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rochdale has been a proud home for Ukrainians ever since they were forced to flee Soviet starvation, murder and oppression in the 1930s and 40s. And so many in my constituency will warmly welcome the decision to send 350 advanced air missiles to Ukraine, built in Britain and paid for by the interest on those seized Russian assets. So does he agree that Russia, not Ukraine, should pay the price for Putin's barbaric war?
Yes, I do, and I think it's very important that we emphasise when we do send these missiles to Ukraine that, one, we are supporting Ukraine, as we have done throughout, but secondly, that is not paid for by the British taxpayer, but is paid for on the interest of Russian assets that have been frozen.
Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that in the context of the threat posed by Putin, we must be providing more guidance and support to Britons to prepare them for the possibility of a future conflict, and that this should involve a national resilience campaign?
Well, I do think we need to focus on resilience, and in a sense, the shift to 5% is a reflection that national resilience is becoming ever more central in relation to our own national defence, particularly on cyber, where there are frequent attacks from other states. On energy, we've seen from the Ukraine conflict that energy has been weaponised, and in relation to counter-terrorism with state-backed actions in this country, many of which have been thwarted. But she's absolutely right, we need to do more on resilience.
Dr. Zuba Ahmed.
Speaker, while the Prime Minister was in his rightful place at the NATO Summit this week, I was in my constituency of Glasgow South West for the opening of the Janet Harvey Hall, a £250 million installation that will turbocharge shipbuilding in this country and put it in the service of our defence sector. The Prime Minister knows the government shipbuilding very well. We on this side of the House recognise that the defence of our country is now inextricably linked with the growth of our economy and investment in our public services. But this view is not universally shared. So can I ask the Prime Minister to urge the SNP government to back our defence sector as we back our defence sector for the sake of jobs and prosperity in Glasgow South West and further beyond?
Well, I do urge the SNP to back our defence spend and the jobs that it brings with it, but also our defence stance, because I think, as I understand their position, it's against the single most effective capability we have, which is our nuclear deterrent at a time of the greatest volatility we've seen for decades. That is simply wrong in principle, and I urge them to change it.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And at the NATO Summit, was the Prime Minister able to add his voice to the congratulations and thanks that NATO Secretary-General paid to President Trump for the successful military strike on Iran's nuclear programme?
We've long argued that Iran should not be capable of having a nuclear weapon, and what happened on Saturday night was a big step to alleviating that threat. That was the subject of many comments at the NATO summit, along with the congratulations for the ceasefire that has now been brokered, and the emphasis we now need on getting Iran around the negotiating table, for the reason being this: if it's to be irreversible and verifiable, then it is important that that is done through negotiation, and that's what we focused on.
Mark Ferguson.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, especially on defence. Politics is about priorities, and as I know he knows, the most important responsibility of government is defence of the country and defence of its people. So I echo the very sensible points made by the Right Honourable Member for Richmond and Northallerton, sadly, which weren't made by the opposition from bench, particularly his point around our intelligence services. Our intelligence services are the finest in the world. There are those who we will never know and we will never see, who have kept this place safe, our democracy safe, and our communities safe. So will he assure me that as we seek to invest more in defence, there is a particular focus on supporting our intelligence services?
Well, he makes a good point. Our intelligence service do an incredible job, and I pay tribute to them. As he will know, from now on, where the intelligence services are contributing to our national defence, that will be included in our defence spend. Not included in 2.5%, that was core defence as always understood, but then to be added to it, which what takes it to 2.6% in 2027-2028.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, it won't have escaped anyone's notice that whilst the Prime Minister was rightfully away at the G7 and NATO summits, he made tens of billions of pounds of unfunded spending commitments. Yet next week he expects members of Parliament to vote with him to remove money from disabled people who need help to go to the toilet. How can he justify making a moral argument for security abroad whilst removing security from disabled people at home?
Well, as you will know, when we announced the 2.5% increase in defence spending, we made it very clear where that money was coming from, and it was not coming from welfare spend, as he very well knows. But I believe in the moral duty, and it is a moral duty, to defend our country. That means working with our NATO allies and making sure we have the most effective deterrent. He cannot give lectures on the moral duty to protect our country whilst maintaining a position of casting aside the single most effective deterrent that we have. That is unserious.
Sir Nunton.
Oh, thank you, Mr Speaker. I currently visited a NATO Air Force base in Poland as part of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme that I'm currently partaking in with the RAF. I saw firsthand the importance of working closely with our NATO allies to defend our nation and keep us secure, as we witnessed firsthand a scramble to the skies to ward off Russian fighter jets. Can the Prime Minister confirm that he is prioritising the well-being of our armed forces personnel, both at home and abroad, so that they can continue to keep us and our allies safe?
Yeah. Well, I thank her for that. It is, of course, Armed Forces Week, and amongst other things, we have given the Armed Forces the single biggest pay increase in many, many years, and made a strong commitment to other aspects, including their accommodation, because it's important that we recognise and reflect what they do for our country, and it's very important that we ensure that we have and able to retain the brilliance in our armed forces.
Sir Bernard.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I very much welcome NATO's commitment to 3.5% core defence spending and 5% on a broader definition by 2035 for all NATO member states. But the Prime Minister and the government have only published spending figures up until 2030. Isn't it now incumbent upon the government, and when will the government now publish public spending plans for 2030 to 2035 to show how the 3.5% of core defence spending is going to be met by the government? Otherwise it's just an unfunded promise.
Well, as you will know, when we presented the Strategic Defence Review, we had already set out the path to 2.5 and the ambition to 3%. I think it's right that NATO is now, or all NATO allies have agreed the 5% for 2035. That is, of course, subject to review in 2029, both as trajectory and balance. And the reason for that, as he will understand, is that NATO itself is reviewing its capabilities in 2029, and therefore that review will coincide with that review of its own capabilities.
Rachel Bass.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Diplomacy is the best way to prevent risk, to de-escalate risk, and also to ensure that we get long-term security. So could the Prime Minister tell the House what discussions took place about how to escalate the focus on diplomacy in the Middle East to resolve the situation in Gaza, because clearly the architecture is not delivering at pace, but also the forgotten war in Sudan?
Well, I thank you for a question, and can I reassure you that not just at NATO and the G7, but actually on a daily basis we are having discussions with other leaders about the architecture, about the path, about how we can use diplomacy to get to a ceasefire in Gaza and to get to a much better place in Sudan, and thank her for raising Sudan, not raised often enough. We're doing that at speed. We're trying to bring as many allies with us as possible. I do think that if the Iran ceasefire holds, and I hope that it will, that does create the space for saying now is the time for that ceasefire in Gaza. Only the first step, of course, to the route first to recovery and then to a two-state solution.
Sir Julian.
After a worrying start, President Trump has now strengthened NATO both by extracting promises of more money and by the positive comments he made at the end of the summit. Has the Prime Minister had a chance to assess whether this means that his love affair with Vladimir Putin is beginning to cool?
Well, look, firstly, I think it was really important that NATO was united in the way it was last night. And I don't just mean the comments of President Trump. I mean that the whole 32 on the same page on a really important moment for NATO. And he will understand how much hard work, guile and diplomacy went into ensuring that that was the outcome. But I think it was a real sigh of relief around the world that that was the position. In relation to Putin, look, we are urging that this is the moment to push further to get Putin to the table for an unconditional ceasefire. President Zelensky said for many weeks that he's prepared for those talks, and we did discuss that as allies, and I've discussed it many times with President Trump, as he would expect.
Alan Gavin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister care to comment on what our adversaries will think when they hear the Leader of the Opposition mistakenly say we can't afford our defence commitments? Does such a fatuous response keep our country safe?
No, it doesn't. It was frankly embarrassing to suggest I shouldn't have been at NATO or the G7. And I think our backbenchers recognise it. That's not the position traditionally of the Conservative Party. The sooner they get back to that position, the better.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Was there any discussion about the killing zones which currently constitute the provision of humanitarian aid in Gaza?
Yes, there was, and there's real concern about the intolerable position in Gaza and what we can do to alleviate that position. We have repeatedly said that it's intolerable, repeatedly said that the current arrangement for aid are never going to work and can't be maintained. And there is urgent diplomacy going on to try and alleviate that situation. We'll continue in those efforts.
Jas Afla.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I strongly welcome the Prime Minister's announcement on defence spending, especially during Armed Forces Week. Does he agree with me that this is a landmark historic commitment reflecting both the scale of the threats we face and this Labour government's commitment to the security and defence of our country?
Well, I do agree with him. It is landmark. It's very important. It shows the resolve of NATO and it reflects the resolve of this Labour government. I'm pleased that we were closely involved in the crafting and the bringing together of the agreement that was reached yesterday.
Ayab Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The democratic primaries in the most cosmopolitan city in the world has demonstrated that people will no longer support hypocritical and disingenuous politicians. I'm sure the whole House agrees that Iran must not have nuclear weapons. But the Prime Minister, as a lawyer, will understand, I'm sure, that the attack upon Iran by Israel and the US did not engage the Caroline principles, which allow a preemptive strike. Does the Prime Minister agree with that analysis? And if he does not, can he say from that dispatch box that he supported those attacks?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if we all agree that Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons, it's about time we did something about it. And what happened on Saturday night was a big step towards alleviating that threat, and that is really important. I think we now need to complete on that, and the way to complete on that is with the talks that are now needed to get Iran back to the table to make sure that it's irreversible and that it can be verified, and that's what we're focused on.
Kelvin Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's leadership in recognising the need for a strategic response. It's been 35 years since the Options for Change paper began the drawdown of defence spending from 4.1% GDP. We have spent that dividend, gambling we would not need to defend our values, and a generation has benefited from that bet. But we now must take our chips off the table and reinvest in our security. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we must level with the public about the threats we faced and the cost of underinvestment in our armed forces?
Yes, I do agree, and that's why we've begun the hard work of reversing the damage done under the last government. He's right about the dividend that's been enjoyed. Now we must make sure there's a defence dividend, and that is, as we spend more, that is reflected in good, well-paid jobs in the United Kingdom that boost our economy across all parts of our communities.
Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The former Prime Minister has just welcomed the US military action against Iran at the weekend. Why can't the Prime Minister bring himself to welcome it too?
Well, because I've said we need to alleviate the threat. I've said that take us a huge step towards alleviating the threat. And I've discussed that with G7, with NATO colleagues, and I've discussed it with President Trump. And everybody was very pleased that there was such unity on it.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The forced deportation of children is illegal under international law, and yet Russia continues to steal Ukraine's future one child at a time. So can I please ask the Prime Minister if the issue of Ukraine's stolen children was discussed with our allies, and what more is being done to return those children to their homes and their families?
Well, I thank her for raising this, and she's been a hard campaigner, an important campaigner on this. And it is central that if there's to be a ceasefire and a lasting peace in Ukraine, and I hope there is, that it must involve the return of the children. And we have discussed that many times and will continue to do so.
Mr. Speaker, since the Second World War, our national security has been based broadly on three pillars. Our own physical defences, which the Prime Minister mentioned in his statement, the alliances we've built, which he also mentioned, but the third pillar he did not, and that is the international rules-based order. So what discussion did he have at both or either summit about the importance of international law, the undermining of its credibility by inconsistent application between the conflicts in Ukraine and in Gaza, and in particular, did he try and persuade President Trump to lift the United States sanctions on the International Criminal Court?
I've long been an advocate of the international rules-based order and discussed that regularly with allies, because NATO itself is a rules-based framework and an important one at that. And therefore we do need to maintain those rules-based systems, make sure they're fit for purpose. And I would add that the same is true for trade and the economy as well.
Nigel Collis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a member of the cross-party UK delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, I've had the opportunity to meet Ukrainian members of Parliament who continue to make the powerful case for NATO allies continuing to support them. It's also become clear, Mr. Speaker, that in recent months, increasingly other countries in the region, Poland, the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, are growing ever nervous about their vulnerability in terms of Russia's invasion. Can the Prime Minister comment on the UK's efforts and dialogue with those countries during this period, this unsettling time? And does he agree with me that the security of those Baltic states are important for our own national security?
Well, I thank her for raising this, and she's absolutely right. The Baltic states are incredibly nervous at the moment. They have been, frankly, for the last 3 years or so. We engage with them regularly. I engage with their leaders on a regular basis. They've been brought into the coalition of the willing, Mr. Speaker, and on the occasions they can't attend, I have a special session with them because their concerns are of such importance to us.
Tom Gordon.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the increase to defence spending and the revised target. Earlier this year at the Spring Statement, we saw cuts to the ODA, the Overseas Aid budget, to fund those defence increases. The ODA budget is integral to our international security abroad. So will the Prime Minister rule out any further cuts to this budget as part of the defence spending increases?
Well, look, he's absolutely right to emphasise the importance of overseas aid, and that was a difficult decision. I want to put it back up to 0.7 rather than take it down. And in the meantime, I'm exploring other ways in which we can find funding for overseas aid and working with other countries to that end, because I don't think we can just wait until we're in a position to increase the funding again.
Steen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and the leadership that he is showing on the world stage in really uncertain times, which, beyond the confines of this place, I know are genuinely welcome in my community in Hertford and Stortford. As we mark Armed Forces Week this week, I know veterans in my constituency and servicemen from my constituency will welcome the government's commitment to strengthening our national security. So for the benefit of my constituents, could the Prime Minister set out a little further how we're supporting our armed forces to keep us safe and honouring the service of veterans across the country?
Well, let me first pay tribute to the veterans in his constituency and across the country. We have put in place a number of initiatives already, particularly in relation to homelessness and veterans, more broadly in relation to accommodation and the support that goes in just to veterans, but also our armed services. That's vitally important as a reflection of their contribution, but also to ensure that for those serving, we deal with the retention crisis caused by the party opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst we may disagree on the detail, can I agree with the Prime Minister that as far as possible in this place, it would be better to keep partisan politics out of national security issues? And who knows, I may get the whip withdrawn for saying that, but so be it. There are things that go beyond party politics. So can I thank the Prime Minister for all his hard work in the national security interests of this country. When it comes to the G7, he mentioned sanctions, and he, in his statement, said, I urge the United States to do more on sanctions. Is he aware that the United States is actually urging the United Kingdom to do more on sanctions when it comes to Russia? So can the Magnitsky legislation be widened and deepened so it captures more of Russian assets and also possibly other countries that may have sanctions imposed upon them soon, for example, Georgia? On NATO, Joint Expeditionary Force, which was mentioned in the summit, he will know, having attended the Norway meeting some weeks ago, that the Ukraine is a JEF partnership nation. Could he tell the House if the UK supports Ukraine becoming a full member of the Joint Expeditionary Force, and if so, when that might happen?
Well, I thank him for his questions, but they're all good questions, so I'll endeavour to answer each part of them. In relation to sanctions, which is being discussed intensely, as he will understand, there are two elements to that, really. The first is the immediate application of sanctions in relation to Russia, where we are attempting to make sure that we all act together, so the US, the UK and the EU together, and that is the focus of our discussions and what we're urging on the US. He will know there's a piece of legislation in the US which is ready to go and needs to be coordinated with what we're doing. On the longer term, I think we need to look always at whether there's more we can do within the framework on sanctions, and we can discuss that in this House. On the important point he makes about Ukraine and Jeff, we've been a leading advocate of Ukraine having a bigger role or having a role in Jeff, and Ukraine already has enhanced partnership with the JEF, and that's the first of its kind. That was at the last JEF meeting that we had in Norway just a few weeks and months ago, and we were one of the leading nations pushing for that greater involvement. We'll see over time whether that can be taken further, either with JEF or with NATO, obviously, but it was an important first step, and not only a reflection for Ukraine, but also a message to Russia.
Thank you to the Prime Minister for his leadership representing us around the world in the last few weeks, exactly where he should be. Does the Prime Minister want to remind the party opposite about the fact it was the Labour government which last spent 2.5% of GDP on defence? And can the Prime Minister set out how increasing our defence spending will keep our country safe and support high-quality manufacturing jobs in West Bromwich and the whole nation?
Well, I'm happy to remind the House that we had 2.5% of GDP on defence spending under the last Labour government, and we'll have it under this Labour government. In 14 long years, they didn't do that.
Mr. Macbeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the increase in defence spending. So will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to explain where the money is coming from, particularly as his government continues to weaken our country's economy, and when another expensive benefit U-turn on top of the winter fuel U-turn is on its way?
Well, she must have missed the record investment in our country in the last 12 months, £120 billion, the 4 interest rate cuts and the fastest growth in the G7 in the first quarter of this country. And every time we've increased defence spending, as we did with the 2.5%, we've set out at the same time where that money is coming from.
Mr. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I find the Leader of the Opposition incredibly disappointing, so goodness knows what her own benches think. But while she's talking Britain down, can I commend the Prime Minister for the leadership he's shown this week? And could he say a little more about how businesses in the defence supply chain, particularly in the Teesside Defence and Innovation Cluster, can contribute to this national mission for defence and security?
Well, I'm grateful for him for raising this question. There are 2 or 3 principles here. Firstly, as we increase defence spend, we need to see that reflected in good, well-paid jobs in constituencies across the country. Secondly, Mr Speaker, there will obviously be the big sectors on defence who will benefit, but we've put together a hub for smaller supply chain businesses, which will be in pretty well every constituency, whether they're defence-specific or not, to ensure that they take advantage of the contracts and the extra spending on defence. And in that way, we can ensure that there's a dividend back in the United Kingdom for the extra spend that we're putting in place.
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There's been some recent confusion from defence ministers surrounding the purchase of 12 F-35A nuclear-capable fast jets. So can the PM please inform the House when the proposed in-service date is for this important capability?
Well, we made the commitment to the capability. We're obviously now talking to allies about precisely what the timetable will be for that, and I'll update the House. But the important thing is the commitment is there. He will know that this is a commitment to the NATO initiative, bringing us within that initiative, and therefore a lot of moving parts. But the commitment we've made is a very firm commitment, and I'll set out the timeline and progress on it in due course.
Dr. Peter Prince.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So F-35A, hard power. BBC World Service, soft power. Would he agree with me that the World Service is a crucial element of our soft convening power?
Yes, I've long been a supporter of the BBC World Service, and it chimes with the other questions I had about the soft power of this country. We have incredible soft power, incredible strength in our diplomacy, and that very often achieves results in a way that then makes it less necessary to use the hard power.
Then the best subject.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There is scepticism in my Huntingdon constituency at how the increase in defence spending might create good local jobs there. But having already pitched to the Chancellor and the Defence Secretary earlier this month to the Procurement Minister alongside my local authority CEOs, Huntingdon is recognised as the home of UK defence intelligence capability, as well as that of US operations in Europe, as well as NATO's. So, given 10% of the equipment budget is now pledged to developing new technology, along with the £400 million Defence Innovation Fund, will the Prime Minister back my commitment to leveraging the designation of RAF Whitton as an MOD trailblazer site to build a defence technology cluster to create highly technical local jobs and build new defence capability from Huntingdon?
I think he's in discussion with our ministers about this, and obviously we look forward to taking that forward. In relation to what he refers to as the scepticism of his constituents in Huntingdon, I want to reassure them through him that this increased defence spend will bring yield to Huntingdon, to his constituents, in the defence-specific sectors, but also in the supply chains as well.
Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's statement and his leadership. Can I just return to international humanitarian law? The International Development Select Committee recently published a report that showed that IHL is under threat like never before, and attacks on aid workers are rising. So can the Prime Minister assure us that the UK will be a champion for IHL, and could he elaborate on conversations on upholding it in relation to Gaza, but also Sudan and the many other countries ravaged by conflict around the world?
We have an absolute commitment to international humanitarian law, and it's extremely important that we keep to that, whether that's in Gaza or in Sudan, and that guides, that is the framework through which we make our decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to the evils of terrorism and aggression across the Middle East, all paths lead back to the Iranian regime, be that the sponsorship of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, or indeed at the heart of that regime, the IRGC. So, whilst I fully appreciate the Prime Minister will not speculate on prescription from the dispatch box, will he at least reflect on how it can be that despite calls from both sides of this House over many, many years to prescribe the IRGC, it still hasn't happened, not least when he took quite right and proper action to prescribe Palestine action after the attack on Bryce Norton last week, that the IRGC still sit unprescribed?
I thank him for raising this. As he knows, we keep prescription under constant review and won't hesitate to take the most effective measures against the Iranian regime. He will know we've already sanctioned the IRGC in its entirety, including individual commanders, but we do keep this under constant review.
Luke Charters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I praise the Prime Minister for his work on the new 5% target, ensuring that we reach that in terms of national security and core defence. Would he agree with me that just as the last Labour government in the 1940s helped found NATO, that this Labour government could help found a multilateral defence development bank that would ensure we reach the 5% by the mid-2030s?
Well, I thank him for that question, and there is a debate going on across allies as to how we can work together on the increased spending in terms of the spend itself, financial arrangements, whether it's development banks or others, and ensuring that we coordinate our capability and cooperation, because the last thing we want is everybody spending more money, but in an uncoordinated way, and there's been intense discussion about that.
John Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, the situation in Scotland is very difficult. I welcome the news that we are to go further with our at-sea deterrence, and of course the nuclear missile Trident boats are based in Faslane. But as we have heard, First Minister John Swinney and his SNP administration do not back nuclear weapons. Further, they've created a hostile environment for defence firms in Scotland because they will not back any firms which make ordnance. This week we've also heard the former First Minister Humza Yousaf claim wrongly that allowing our American allies to use the Prestwick Air Base to refuel is some kind of war crime. What can we do to nullify the threat to British security from these fifth columnists?
Beat them. But I mean, it is a serious question. This isn't just the usual politics. This is a serious question of national security. The nuclear deterrent, the at-sea deterrent, is, as he rightly says, housed in Scotland. I went and met one of the subs coming back in just a few months ago. It was a very humbling experience, quite frankly, and got an even deeper sense of what they do for our country, and it should be supported in its own right and as an essential deterrent. And it's among the reasons that we need to change a government in Scotland.
John Slinger.
I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, which shows that international cooperation, the ability to forge relationships of trust and human empathy are signs of strength, not weakness. Our country is stronger for his leadership and pursuit of peace globally through diplomatic means.
Hear, hear.
Does my right honourable friend agree that we can only deter war and defend our allies such as Ukraine if outward-looking diplomacy is backed up by ever stronger armed forces and an ever stronger economy? That these matters ought to unify all in this House, and that it's very unfortunate that we've seen petty party political games, frankly, from the Leader of the Opposition.
Hear, hear.
Well, I agree with him, and all I can say is, in fairness, I can see that on the faces of some of the members opposite, there is clearly disquiet at the approach that the Leader of the Opposition took, and it's not surprising.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 5% defence investment pledge, resilience spending appears to include energy infrastructure. Given the evidence about Chinese-made cellular internet modules and kill switches, will he say categorically that China must be kept out of all critical infrastructure, including wind turbines and solar panels?
Well, he's right to raise this issue, and obviously we carefully review and monitor any Chinese involvement in any elements of security. But it is right that we now include resilience in our overall definition of national spend and act accordingly.
Laura Cox.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his commitment to keeping our country safe and his effective diplomacy to that end. While our international aid budget is now diminished, it remains my belief that the work we do to prevent and respond to humanitarian crises around the world plays a crucial role in global stability and security, and in turn our own. Can the Prime Minister reaffirm his commitment to this vital role for the UK in the world?
Yes, I can, and she's right to raise it and to describe it in the way that she did. And we're a leader on this, continue to be. We want to get our aid budget back up, but in the meantime, I want to work with other countries to find other ways of providing and financing that support as a matter of some urgency.
Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the increase in defence spending, but how on earth is the Prime Minister going to pay for it when his party can't agree on a small reduction in the welfare bill?
We have set out in clear terms when we went to 2.5%, both the date plus the way in which we would pay for it. That's the way we do business on this side of the House. For 14 years, they lost control of the economy, left hollowed-out armed forces, armed forces, a 22 billion black hole, and frankly, they're in no position to lecture anyone about these issues. Still less after the response of the Leader of the Opposition, which shows exactly why their party is sliding into irrelevance.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's clear today that the Leader of the Opposition should never represent the United Kingdom on the world stage. Absolutely outrageous, Mr. Speaker. But I am grateful to my right honourable friend for his statement, and following the comments of other honourable members, can I ask him what assessment he has made of the potential opportunities for Scottish-based defence and aerospace industries, which already support hundreds of jobs in Coatbridge and Bellsill, arising from the expectation to reach 4.1% of GDP by 2027? And does he share my concern that the disjointed defence policy of the SNP risks jobs and investment in Scotland, and we need to fight that at all costs?
Well, he shouldn't worry too much about the Leader of the Opposition representing our country. She never will. Mr. Speaker, if she did, the chair at the NATO Summit would have a little sticky note on it saying busy at PMQs, presumably. Mr. Speaker, that's how unserious her point is. But on the substantive question of jobs in Scotland, there is the real potential now to build on what Scotland does. It's got a proud history in relation to our defence and security, and this provides an opportunity to build on that platform.
James Shannon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister very much for his statement? I know that nobody in this House can doubt the sincerity of his careful words and his commitment for what is best for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland at the G7 and NATO Summit. The Prime Minister will be aware of my support for Israel and indeed the support of so many in this great nation. That was, I believe, one of the major issues at the summit. So can the Prime Minister outline, please, whether time was taken with our closest ally in the United States of America to discuss steps that can be taken to cut the head off the IRGC and to ensure that the USA bombing of the Iranian nuclear programme was a success and thereby secure a truce and a lasting peace in the Middle East? Thank you.
Well, I can assure him that is an ongoing discussion that we have with our US allies, both at leader level and between our teams on an ongoing and constant basis. Israel has the right to be safe and secure, and it is neither safe nor secure at the moment. We have to be absolutely clear about that and the right of Israel to defend itself. And that means discussions about the IRGC, it means discussions about Iran, which has been a constant source of threat and terror and conflict in the region. And yes, we discussed not just the attack on Saturday, but also the further measures that can be taken to make sure that Iran never has the capability to develop nuclear weapons.
Tricia Fergus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and for his leadership, something which I'm sure is welcomed by our allies around the world, if not by the Leader of the Opposition. My right honourable friend mentions that there is now a window of opportunity for peace in the Middle East, and I'm sure that's something we would all want to see happen and come to fruition. However, with deadly attacks on Palestinian people seeking food continuing, can the Prime Minister advise from his discussions whether there is any prospect of Israel allowing the UN and other humanitarian organisations to resume food distribution in an ordered and fair way?
Well, they should do, and we're urging that they do, because the current arrangements are intolerable and they're never going to work. And we need to be really clear about that, and we will continue to urge that with our allies and obviously talking to leaders across the region, as she would expect. But now is the time to push on also for the broader ceasefire to alleviate the situation more generally and allow a path to open for the long-term conflict resolution that's needed.
Respect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's the role of any government and Prime Minister, and it's their first duty to keep this country safe. I know it's a role that our Prime Minister takes incredibly seriously, which is in stark comparison to what we've seen today from the Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister will know when he visited Blackpool, and he has visited Blackpool many times since becoming Leader of our party, that young people told him at my sixth form college they're crying out for local jobs in the Blackpool area to keep them there. Will he ensure that this defence increase of 5%, which is welcome, will create the decent, well-paid jobs on the Fylde coast so young people in Blackpool can get those jobs where they live?
Well, I'm grateful for his question. I've visited Blackpool many times, as he knows. I know firsthand just how important it is for young people to see money going into their economy with jobs in Blackpool for them. And I remember profoundly at a sixth form college in Blackpool asking the group of, I think, 17-year-olds how many of them were proud to be from Blackpool, and they all put their hand up. And when I asked them how many of them thought that their jobs in the future would be in Blackpool, only one of them put their jobs up, because they all thought that they would have to leave Blackpool to get the jobs that they wanted. We need to turn that around. This gives us an opportunity to start doing that.
We now come to Chris Vance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today? And from a personal point of view, can I thank him for his recent visit to Harlow and the Downs Primary School, which recently received an excellent Ofsted report. Would the Prime Minister agree with me to achieve the sustainable and long-term peace that we all so desperately want in the Middle East, in Gaza, in the Ukraine and in Sudan? We must work together with one voice with all of our NATO allies, and that's why his leadership on a global level is so important, and it's so important that he attends all of these events to represent our proud nation.
Well, I'm grateful. I remember being the most recent visit to the primary school, I think, was to roll out our free school meals policy. So I was very happy to do that, Mr. Speaker, by actually serving school meals myself. So if all else fails, I've got a backup. But Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right. This is at a time like this. It is actually a time when usually this House comes together and speaks with one voice, and we're the more powerful for it. And I have to say, President Zelensky has told me on a number of occasions how much it means to his people. And to be fairness to the party opposite, they've always been resolute on Ukraine. She needs to look again, the Leader of the Opposition, at her approach. The sooner we get back in a time like this to the kind of cross-party unity we had, the better, because our adversaries know that when they see unity here, that is much more of a problem for them than when they see unserious division.
That completes the statement. Let the front bench change over.
We'll now proceed to read the orders of the day.
By an appropriation, main estimates number 2 bill, second reading.
Now. Minister to move formally.
I beg to move.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary no. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill now be read a third time. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to the general debate on the Armed Forces Day. Minister Luke Pollard, move.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this House considers Armed Forces Day. This week, our nation comes together to give profound thanks to the men and women of our armed forces, their families and veterans, the heroes who give so much and sacrifice so much for their country, at a time when the world is becoming increasingly dangerous, unpredictable and insecure. Right now, our armed forces are helping Ukraine to defend itself against the might of Russia by supplying kit and equipment, nearly 3.5 years into a war which Putin thought would be over in 3 days. Our armed forces are in Singapore with the UK Carrier Strike Group, led by HMS Prince of Wales, strengthening Britain's ties with the Indo-Pacific. They are operating as part of every NATO mission alongside our allies, keeping the peace in zones of potential conflict, and our people are working in the Middle East to de-escalate tensions and stabilise the region. Our armed forces are contributing to UN peacekeeping forces around the world, helping to bring hope to war-torn communities, and they are protecting our shores at home, ready at a moment's notice to respond to any emerging threats. Truly, they are the best of Britain, recognised globally for their professionalism and dedication. And this week, in Armed Forces Week, we have a chance to say thank you, to thank them for their service, to thank their families for their understanding at the times when they are away, to thank those people who support our men and women in uniform, in defence industries, in the supply chain, in the technology companies that help keep them having the fighting edge that keeps our country safe. Now, apart from those affected by COVID restrictions, 2024 was the first year since the inception of Armed Forces Day that there was no national event. This government is proud to have restored it this year, backing 3 days of celebrations in Cleethorpes. And as my honourable friend, the member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes knows, it's a community which carries a long tradition of not just honouring our armed forces, but shaping and supporting them too. From the local RAF station at Northcotes, which was home to the Coastal Command Strike Wing during World War II, disrupting enemy supply chains with great success, to active veteran groups today, like NEL for Heroes, which does outstanding work in North East Lincolnshire, helping veterans to return to civilian life. But although the biggest celebrations will be taking place in Cleethorpes, where the Defence Secretary will be this weekend, there are more than 180 other events taking place across our nation. Earlier this week, my ministerial colleague Lord Coker was among the large crowds which turned out in Northern Ireland to celebrate Armed Forces Day. Happy giving way on that point.
Yeah, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I was very fortunate to be there and had an opportunity to meet Lord Coker from the other House. It was very clear to him and I both that the 60,000 people turned out to commend and celebrate such a wonderful occasion. Can I ask the Minister, maybe later on, if you don't mind, would he outline clearly what can be done to recruit more TA soldiers? Will it be flexibility with employers? Will it be the jobs and the courses they can do? Or will it be to enlarge the numbers of cadets, please? Thank you so much.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, can I thank him for his years of service? It was in Westminster Hall yesterday that he added up all the years that he served in uniform, and I think that was 14.5 years in total in various roles. So can I thank him for his service to our country? It is absolutely vital that we address the retention and recruitment crisis we inherited from the previous government. We're making good progress in that regard. A key part of that is not only recruiting new people to our regular forces, but also making it easier to join the reserves as well. And whether people are serving full-time, part-time in their spare time, there is an opportunity for people right around the country to contribute to our armed forces. My ministerial colleague, the Minister for Veterans and People, will be setting out further steps as to how we're going to improve our reserves as we approach the Armed Forces Bill in the next session of Parliament, making the case that improving our reserves makes us safer, but also provides more opportunity for the nation to have a closer connection with those people who serve as well. Happy to.
I'm very grateful to the Minister. One of the 180 events that he mentioned will be Armed Forces Day in Andover, which I'll be attending on Saturday. As he knows, Andover is home to Land Army headquarters, and I wondered whether he could reflect on the importance of the work of celebrating armed forces in those communities which physically embrace their headquarters and their camps and residences, to sustain that connection between the non-uniformed civilian population and those who protect them on a daily basis.
Well, can I thank him and thank him for his attendance at an Armed Forces Day event this weekend. As someone who represents Devonport, home to Western Europe's largest naval dockyard, I'm acutely aware of the relationship, the important history and the connections today between our military, those civilians that in Devonport's case support the fleet, and our wider community, including veterans. I think it is absolutely right we tell the story of that connection, not just by looking back at the battles of previous years, those people who never returned from wars, but making the case that investing in our defence today creates good, well-paid jobs. It provides opportunities for our young people, and it's one of the sources of great pride, I think, that our Army, our Navy and our Air Force all feature in the top 5 employers of apprentices in the country. It's a huge opportunity to celebrate the skills that we have, but also the connections between our people, because I think all our communities are proud of our armed forces, and this weekend's a great opportunity to say that again.
John Slinger.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He knows that recently I had the great privilege of visiting our base in Erbil in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where I saw